There's a question I've been asking myself since 2019, and a narrative that I've been fighting against ever since then. Why do so many people hate Child's Play? Hey, what's up everybody? Nick here, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about Child's Play 2019. And I want to ask a very simple question. Why do so many people hate this movie? Is it manufactured? Is it worthy of being hated on? What are the reasons for it? Because in my estimation, based off of the film itself, I don't think it's justified whatsoever. All right, so I think it's fair to say that this all started with the movement that Don Mancini led, which was Not My Chucky, basically. See, Don Mancini still had plans for the Child's Play franchise. He was doing the Chucky TV series. It actually hadn't premiered yet, but it was in production, and he had openly talked about having plans for more movies in the future. So when MGM and Orion were like, hey, we're going to remake the original Child's Play, I understand why it ruffled some feathers with him and everybody involved with the TV series. But that really got the ball rolling with some of the fans online. So before a single frame was even shot of Child's Play, people had already decided that they weren't going to like it. Now, it wasn't everybody, but it was a large swath of people. And I'm sorry, but from the beginning, if you have two competing visions of Chucky and one being very outspoken about how the other one is illegitimate somehow, you're already up against it. That's some pretty bad PR. And it didn't really get you a lot of goodwill from the fan base, which was totally unfair because the movie hadn't even gone before cameras yet. Nobody knew what they were going to be getting. You had a lot of people involved with the franchise over the years being outspoken about how they weren't going to support it, and they definitely weren't going to be a part of it if asked. Well, unfortunately for them, they were never in the plans. They were never in the cards. That was not going to be a thing. See, Orion and MGM wanted to truly reboot this. When you hear the word remake, a lot of times you're automatically going to assume a Psycho 1998 situation. Now, some may like that movie, but this is just to say that a lot of people think that you're really just going to redo what had already been done before. But I think in the last decade or so, we should have come to learn by now that most of the time it's more or less a reboot. It's restarting. There's no connective tissue to anything before it, but they definitely tried their own thing. We don't really do shot-for-shot remakes anymore. And when we do, they're absolutely god-awful atrocious. Now, for someone like me, when we learned more and more about this movie, I got more and more excited. To find out that this was going to be an AI-enhanced Chucky was awesome to me. We weren't going to go back to the possessed doll of a serial killer. I like that a lot. That's already a new bent here. That was going to open up tons of possibilities for what Chucky could do in this movie. And it did do just that. I also really liked the cast. You know, Aubrey Plaza, Gabriel Bateman, Brian Tyree Henry. I was like, okay. And then we get the announcement a couple months before the movie comes out that Mark Hamill is doing the voice of Chucky. And then I go and see the movie, and I see it with my family, and none of them like it, and I liked it. I actually had a really good time with it. I thought it was fun. I thought it was funny. I thought it had some great kills, and I thought it was original enough to where it stood on its own, and I wanted to see a sequel to it. And then I saw the audience reaction. See, critics were actually kind of forgiving to this movie. If I'm not mistaken, it's rated fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, which is surprising for a slasher remake about a killer doll. But the fan base was really split. I would actually go as far to say that more fans were outspokenly against this movie than were accepting of this movie. And I've noticed that as the last 5 or 6 years have gone on since the movie came out, nobody really talks about it anymore. You don't see people doing videos on it. There's no news on a follow-up to it because it's just not going to happen. And it just kind of came and went. It was like a fart in the wind. And that kind of disappointed me because there are reasons to really like Child's Play, even if you're a fan of those original movies. And if you look over my shoulder, you can see that I am. I grew up on Chucky. Chucky is one of my favorites. I've debated many times my own personal Mount Rushmore. I might put Chucky on there. I like Chucky more than I like Jason, and that might be sacrilege to say, but that's just kind of how it is. I've always been a really big fan, and I love Brad Dourif as Charles Lee Ray. It's just perfect. I think it's a perfect marriage, and I think it's the role he'll always be remembered for. And I think it's important to add context here, because in the year 2018, when this movie was announced and went before cameras, I was at a point where I was done with what Don Mancini was doing with Chucky. That's not to say that I don't respect the years of service he's given to the series, because I absolutely do. And I think he's made some great movies in this series. Curse of Chucky had no business being as good as it was, and it's in my top 3 of the franchise. So this isn't a slight at Don. But I feel like in the later years, Don had pretty much said everything he had to say that someone like me wanted to hear. I didn't want to get into even more convoluted storylines. I didn't want to keep breaking rules. I didn't want to bring a bunch of characters back that some actors just can't act and should never have come back in the first place, or simply just are adding more and more layers to an already overstuffed story. Things like that kept happening, and it got to a point where I just felt like Don had really said all he needed to say with Chucky. I didn't like Seed of Chucky. I quite liked Curse of Chucky. I didn't like Cult of Chucky. I was like, okay, you're 1 out of the last 3, man. Maybe it's time for a new voice to come into here. And see, I think that's the issue right there. I think that the issue for a lot of people is not being open-minded going into this movie in the first place. I was, and that's why I had the experience that I did. Because if you walk away from this movie and you say that there aren't cool kills in it, you're absolutely lying to yourself. There's some great kills in this movie. There were moments where I was worried they were going to skirt the line of PG-13 a little bit too much, but no, it's definitely an R-rated film, and there are multiple kills where you're like, holy shit. And I really appreciated that with this movie. I also was worried that they wouldn't utilize the AI features of Chucky and everything that he is connected to. And I was wrong. They did. The final act of this movie is basically a free-for-all where a bunch of machines are killing people. I loved that. Like, I was like, yes, this is what I needed. Not just one doll that's possessed by a killer. No, we've got a bunch of robots trying to kill people. Teddy bears, helicopters, let's do it. Razor blades. I was all about all of it. I thought it was a super, super fun time, and I think they really delivered on the premise. Now, that's not to say that everything about this movie is great. Look, Andy's friend group, their acting is terrible, and they're cringy. I don't like them at all. The design of the Buddy doll itself is not good. I understand they wanted to be similar enough, but different enough to differentiate between the two, but my God, it's just not good. It's an eyesore. It's honestly terrifying to look at. It's not a good design. Not everything about the movie is great, but some more pros about it. I don't know. It's quite funny. I think Aubrey Plaza and Gabriel Bateman are actually really good in it, and I like their dynamic. And I think it's very relevant to today's times, where parents a lot of the times feel more like a friend than a parent. And sometimes that's a bad thing, because you have to be a disciplinarian and be a parent. But I really liked their dynamic in this movie, and I think they worked great. And Gabriel Bateman actually had a lot of presence here. I actually believed the relationship he had with Chucky, and I felt bad when that relationship deteriorated. For a kid actor, I think he did a really good job, and he's definitely better than Alex Vincent was in the first Child's Play. I also think the score by Bear McCreary is fantastic in this movie, and I love the Buddy song and the fact that it is sung by Mark Hamill. There's a lot to like about this movie. But the answer to the simple question that I posed at the beginning of this video, why do so many people hate this movie? Well, I think that answer is pretty clear. Because I think if you take the movie on its merits, you can't walk away saying anything other than it was fine. Maybe it wasn't for you, maybe you didn't love it. But to walk away and say this thing was a travesty, was an abomination, it should never exist, we just kind of lose all credibility with me. Because that's just simply not the case. And if you had any amount of critical thinking, you wouldn't say that. See, you're speaking out of emotion. You're speaking out of allegiance to something else. You're not speaking from the mind. You're speaking from the heart. And I get that, but with what I do, sometimes I have to put my critical cap on and I have to look at a movie based on the merits. And when you look at the merits, it's a fine movie. But if you went into it open-minded and you were ready for something new and a fresh new take, hell, you might have walked away like me and said, that was actually pretty good, and I'd like a sequel to it. It made about 3 times its budget, so it was a modest hit, but nobody talked about it. Again, it came and it went. It wasn't as big as I think that they hoped it would be, and I think that's one reason, amongst many others, including legal issues, that it just didn't continue from this point. And that's disappointing because, again, I've seen a lot of really bad remakes. I've seen a lot of really bad reboots and requels and sequels. And Child's Play 2019 is just not one of them. If it's hashtag not your Chucky, that's fine. But that doesn't mean it's a bad movie. That doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve a chance. For anybody watching this video that may not have seen this movie because they were like, nope, that's not my Chucky, I implore you to give this a chance. But I'm asking you to try to go into it open-minded. Because I feel like if you don't, you're not going to have the experience you should have with it. I have a good friend on here, goes by the name Saturn Video, my buddy Mark. Shout out. He's a big Child's Play fan. He never watched this one. It wasn't that he thought it was sacrilege that they made it. He just didn't really have interest because it's not his Chucky, and I totally get it. He gave it a chance finally. He said, screw it, whatever. And guess what? He thought it was fine. You know what? I kind of dug it. Whatever, harmless. And I feel like that's the worst you can say about this movie. And honestly, for me to go on a little rant here at the end, I just find that the entire campaign that Don Mancini and some of the people involved with the franchise pushed against this movie was pathetic. It was childish, and it was honestly like beneath anybody, let alone somebody that's been a veteran of a franchise for decades. If you didn't feel like it was competition to you, if you actually didn't care, if it was not interfering in any way whatsoever with what you were doing, you wouldn't have felt the need to publicly drag it every chance you got. And look where all that negative PR got us, guys. Look where we are. Chucky gets canceled. The series is no longer happening. Don Mancini doesn't have anything going on. He says he has stuff written. Who's going to give him the funding? That's genuinely what I want to know. And I want to ask you guys, if you are a Child's Play fan, do you actually believe in your heart of hearts that Don Mancini at this point is going to be the person that brings Chucky back to the silver screen, that makes Chucky an $100 million, moneymaker? Again, do you actually believe that? Because I think that if you're being critical and you're using your brain, you would go, well, no, he's not going to be the one to do that. And if you want Chucky to be brought back to greatness at all, I don't think the answer was ever pushing away anybody that wanted to come in and try to revitalize the brand. If anything, I think it's time to say, Don Mancini, it's time to hang him up, man. But I want to know what you guys think. Why do you think people hate Child's Play 2019? Are you someone that hates it? And why do you hate it? Are you someone that hasn't seen it because you just didn't have interest and maybe you're now going to give it a chance because of this video or maybe other reasons? Whatever you have to say about this movie, I want to know down below in the comments section. So throw a like on this, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll just end it by saying this, guys. I genuinely think that if you go in open-minded, you're going to have a good time with this movie. And I think that if you walk away and say this is one of the worst things you've ever seen, you just haven't seen a lot of movies. But what do I know? I'm just a low-level YouTuber in Ohio. So you can choose to take my words as gold or not. But having said that, I'm out of here. So go watch Child's Play 2019. Don't be a negative Nancy. This is Nick at the Lost River Drive-In, and I'm pulling out.